Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Rush Roundtable. This is episode number 135. We start our Power Windows song discussions. Before we do that, we have a brand new guest, Pat, in the top right corner. Welcome to Rush Roundtable. We're happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so we usually read from this book here. We are going to stop doing that because we feel like it kind of takes up too much time, and we feel people probably skip through it anyway. So if you want to go buy the book, it is pretty awesome. But instead of that, this is the opening song for Power Windows. We're going to give, kind of some opening thoughts, maybe some facts about Power Windows, and then we'll give you some opening thoughts about the song. So I want to first say that Power Windows is the first album that Rush recorded outside of Canada since Hemispheres. They hired new producer Peter Collins for this record, and this was also the first album that Rush recorded, or rather released on CD. So fun little fact there. I'm going to turn it over to Michael. You can give us some opening thoughts you have about the big money.
So, Power Windows, one of Geddy's favorite Rush albums, really recorded and, written as a reaction to Grace Under Pressure and how heavily keyboard centric it was. And the Big Money was the really big hit from that album. And, Power Windows, at least in Canada, reached number 2 in the charts, number 9 in the UK, and number 10 in the US. And, just from that opening chord, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, if you go back, Signal's first chord was a keyboard. Grace Under Pressure's first, thing was a keyboard. What the first thing you hear in Power Windows, you hear Alex. And that's what people have been longing to hear ever since, go back as far as Permanent Waves. It is Alex just going, yep, it's not just about the keys. And yes, there's a lot of keys here. And the album is so 80s. It drips the 80s. But, from that opening guitar chord, it's, hey, Alex, where have you been? Glad to have you back. And it's almost a turning point of reintroducing Alex to the main, the main area of what Rush is, rather than taking a backseat and having keyboards take over the full gamut.
Yeah, very well said. I mean, yeah, I think right at that opening chord in the Big Money, it's immediately evident that there's a new producer, Peter Collins. And I think there's just a crisper sound, and just the quality's better. You can immediately tell the quality, not that the quality was bad on Grace Under Pressure, but you can just tell that, it's not original Vapor Trails quality. No offense, Vapor Trails. But you can just tell that Rush is back. It's still synthy, but it's still proggy in a way, and you just tell it's kind of like Rush is back. So yeah, I mean, let's talk through the opening instrumentation from that, that opening power chord, and we'll give it to Alex up there with the Monopoly board background. Of course, that's from the music video of this song too. Awesome stuff.
So the funny thing it's perfect that you're bringing up the guitar intro for that, because this song, like so many, no other Rush songs, the guitars are tuned up a whole step. So it's the sort of thing that instead of the standard E, A, D, G, B, E, he's up to F sharp. So he's able to play open chords. He begins with an A open chord physically, but we hear it as a B. So already, in his life and has said in later interviews, he likes to come up with parts that could have people saying, wait, how do you do this? Some bands like Alice in Chains, AC/DC would say, well, we want people to play our riffs easily. We want people buying our albums and hearing it. Lifeson's was saying, well, I'd like to make people work for it. So yeah, in that respect, the guitar is a bit different. The chord progression itself is basically two different 1-4-5 chord progressions with kind of a little bit of a pivot point on where the 4 and the 5 would come together. So he's done that on Limelight. Other bands have done that. So it's nothing too out there esoteric. But of course, the way they layer everything, the way they do everything makes it a little more interesting. As what you guys were saying with Peter Collins, his way of working was different than what they were used to. They wanted to record as a trio, get the bed tracks down, then maybe do guitar and bass overdubs as needed. But Collins was more of a, here's the click track, let's layer this thing, which was a little awkward for them. But like Ryan's saying, the crisper sound, I always actually describe this album as a very three-dimensional album. And I feel like that's because of Collins' production, where it's the way he layered it. And I fully agree with the idea that it's great to have a band perform, which they did go back to certainly for counterparts. But in that respect, that the layering of this album seemed to really, as I say, make it very three-dimensional, very full. I will admit there's more that I can say about some of the instrumentation, chord progressions, etc. But some of that might come back in the solos, so I feel like I should probably allow us to get into the lyrics here and not take up too much time.
Okay. Yeah, anyone else want to add to that on that opening instrumentation?
It's almost like Alex is a guitarist and he knows his stuff.
well, yeah, I mean, I was
these chords, I'm like, I
was just going to say that, like, I really think that this intro, it just demonstrates, like, it almost feels like they have their confidence back too. It's just really, this album has balls, at least this song, leading off. And, of course, this album thematically is about power. It's not a concept album, but thematically, the songs are about power. And I do think that this song was intentionally first, not only because it was probably the band thought it was going to be the hit song, and from the Spirit of Radio, Tom Sawyer, Subdivisions, Distant, all the hit songs were first. I do think that was strategically placed, but I also think that money kind of is the root of all evil, and it's probably the quickest way to power, hence them putting it first. So lyrically, yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was just going to say with the opening notes, they opened the Show of Hands tour with this song. And I think that the best opening songs are ones that have a nice long instrumental opening. It's why Spirit was so great as an opener when they would play it, why The Anarchist, surprisingly, was an outstanding opener on the R40 tour. So this song as an opener was perfect with that opening note. And I was really happy they got to hear it on the Clockwork Angels tour, because it went perfectly right after Subdivisions. And ironically enough, they played Subdivisions right after it on the Show of Hands tour. But I think that those opening notes, though, just set the tone for the album. And the sound itself, the quality, they should have used the producer for this for a couple of the other albums that came after, because we've talked about before how Presto, that album has the production for it's kind of muted, it's a little dull, it's not the best. This album has some oomph to it, and it starts with these opening notes.
100% agree. Let's talk lyrics. Big money goes around the world. Big money underground. Big money got a mighty voice. Big money make no sound. Big money pull a million strings. Big money hold the prize. Big money weave a mighty web. Big money draw the flies. Paul, what do you think?
It's 1985. There's a lot of things going on in the world. Capitalism is up front, and this is basically Neil's way of talking about, like you said, money creates or gives the illusion of power. And, so goes around the world and goes underground. So it's out there, but it's also underground. It's secret. It's got a mighty voice, but it makes no sense. It's the not the opposites, but like the polar opposites of what money can do to people, right? Like creates opportunities, but it can bring people down pretty darn quick. So it's that constant struggle. That's how I interpret the lyrics. And I mean, it's a theme, like you said, power will be the theme throughout the whole album. It doesn't matter which song, right? It's a great song to start the album. And, every time I hear that opening chord, I've visualized the video, and I see the video like the behind Alex, the computer animation, which for 1985 was high tech, which now it looks silly, but
Kind of
it's
did then.
what's that?
It kind of did a little then too, but go on.
Yeah, but I'm just saying. I mean, I every time I hear the song, I imagine that video, and I imagine, like I said, it opened up on a show of hands. That opening, I hear that little intro on a show of hands, and it just gets you right into it, right? It's just, I love it. But that's basically the lyrics are, it's the constant pull and push and pull of what money can do to people and just overall, right? Capitalism.
All right. Sometimes pushing people around, sometimes pulling out the rug, sometimes pushing all the buttons, sometimes pulling out the plug. It's the power and the glory. It's a war in paradise. It's a Cinderella story on a tumble of the dice. This is the kind of chorus. We're calling it the kind of chorus, I guess. I just pulled that from my brain right now. But because it is repeated sort of later. Pat, why don't you tell us what you think?
You know, when I read those lines, it's kind of government oriented, like it seems like Neil was, I don't know, it's maybe he was mad about the war maybe that was at that time, or I don't know, but talking about the power and the glory, war in paradise. And ironically, it's like, when Neil shifts his its drums and over there, with the big snare, it's like it seems like he does a message with this. It's like it's magical for me, and that's the only thing I have to say about that, really. Yeah,
I just wanted to add real quick that the part where it says Cinderella story on a tumble of the dice, obviously talking about gambling. Funny enough, about 6 months, a little over 6 months after this album came out, MGM Resorts International, a major gambling resort, was founded. That was big in the 80s. All those major resorts like Caesar, all these resorts were coming out at the time. And so it's there's so many different ways that you make money and find power. And sometimes it's a Cinderella story, just luck.
Neil's
You're
hit
done?
on that.
Okay. I thought you had something else to say. Sorry.
No, it's just saying that it's just it's just a wonderful little, like all these other lines in here as we go through are all about like power, power, power. But this one line to me is the one that stands out to me because it's really not so much power as just luck, but it's like the common man, how do they get the money?
Yeah, that's a good point. Alex?
Well, no, just that, Neil is certainly, he's certainly referenced that. I mean, Roll the Bones, the album itself. And even then there's a little bit of a foreshadowing with Free Will when you're speaking about, what directs your life. Is it you? Is it something else? Is there that random chance? I mean, Neil's embracing of stoicism with the idea of, well, this is how it's going to be. And then what can I, the person, do with what's being handed to me? And sometimes it is that, that Cinderella story on a tumble of the dice, which, has been used in other capacities as a phrase or a statement.
So I see the first four lines of this, sometimes pushing people around, pulling out the rug, pushing all the buttons, pulling out the plug. Couple things. First of all, Neil repeats lyrics purposefully, always. Donna Halper has said this 100 times on deep dives. The word sometimes, not all the time, sometimes. It's repeated purposefully. Second of all, I do think that this part is kind of a callback to what the band dealt with in 1975, 1976 with 21 Crest of Steel into 2112, right? I mean, the record companies, do this, do that, do it our way, don't do it your way, right? And sometimes pushing people around. It's the record companies bullying, excuse me, these up and coming bands for the sake of money. And of course, they sing about this in Natural Science too. art as expression, not as market campaigns. But I feel like, pushing people around, pulling out the rug, pulling out the plug. I mean, all these are rhymes, but they're metaphors for kind of what they're doing to them as not just musicians, but as people and affecting their career as well. So I do think that it was a subtle, I guess a subtle sort
Jab.
That jab. There you go. Yeah, a subtle jab.
A callback.
A callback, exactly.
Mm.
Yep. All right. Big money goes around the world. Big money take a cruise. Big money leave a mighty wake. Big money leave a bruise. Big money make a million dreams. Big money spin big deals. Big money make a mighty head. Big money spin big wheels. I mean, I think this also goes to the gambling theme, and Nick, you're going to talk about it. Go ahead.
Well, every one of these lines can be taken like a million different directions from the 80s. Big money goes around the world in the 80s. Obviously, the global market was forming, and that was a big that was a commentary by Neil, of course, on the global market and what was going on in the 80s. Big money take a cruise. Cruises are expensive back in the 80s. I don't know how much cruising was going on like there is today, but I'm sure it wasn't cheap. And then big money leave a mighty wake. I mean, he could be very metaphorical here, talking about, how it affects all these people when you do something, or he could be very literal and saying, hey, when you buy $1 million jet boat, leaves a big wake. I mean, there's big money leave a bruise. In the 80s, that's when Tyson came around, the big boxing matches of the 80s. I mean, big money leave a bruise, though, it hurts people. There's the genius of Neil's lyrics in not all the songs. Sometimes he's a lot more straightforward, but in a lot of the songs, you can take what he says so many different ways. Sometimes I wonder if he even meant to do that. But here, I think each one of these verses are a different subject about money. The first one being about being strictly about, power. The second one being kind of about chance or about, forcing your way to that money. And then this one just being about what you can do with the money and all the different things that happen because of it. But I really think that I agree with what Ryan said, and everybody else I'm sure would agree that this is definitely a callback to the 70s when they were being affected by the record companies. Yeah, I just think each verse is its own little subject on money.
Absolutely. All right. Continuing. Sometimes building ivory towers, sometimes knocking castles down. It's hard not to sing it. Sometimes building you a stairway, lock you underground. It's that old time religion. It's the kingdom they would rule. It's the fool on television getting paid to play the fool. Michael, what do you think?
So I guess going back, thinking that this song is about, trade in the 80s and big money being, both the good and bad about it. An ivory tower can be metaphorical, or it can be, having the money to have your own ivory tower. Makes me think of the song by Pearl Jam, where the man locks himself in a tower with all his money, and all he has is his money, and everyone thinks he's a fool. But it's the old time religion. It's the kingdom they would rule. Well, you could think that in terms of Catholicism, where if you're looking at them from a cynicism point of view, do they all they really care about is money, or is it much more of a holy vantage point? I think the last two lines are great. It's that fool on television getting paid to play the fool. Sure, you think that for the untrained eye, you may think they're really enjoying it, but really it's just a paycheck. So it's power in a different way. It's the power over what you believe may be real. So it's power, but the power over your reality. So it's a different form of power. Sometimes building you a stairway. Well, a stairway can go up or it can go down. And he's saying that, power may not necessarily be the power to go up, maybe the power to go down. So it can be taken a multitude of ways.
I think it's also the power of control too, and
Absolutely.
it's the fool on television getting, I mean, you're okay. He's the word fool is being used in two different ways here in both of these lines, right? Getting paid to play the fool. Okay, you're an actor. You're playing someone that's, a doofus on television, right? But in real life, in reality, you are a fool because you're being controlled by, the big man or whoever's running the show. You know what I mean? So
By Mr.
it's,
Big.
yeah. I mean, it's like, it's one is the character, one is the human. So there's a little bit of control here too in these lines. All right. At this point in the song, there's kind of a little interlude / bridge, we're calling it. And then Alex goes into, I don't know, perhaps I feel like it's a kind of a forgotten about solo in terms of the catalog, but it's a very 80s solo, and it's a, it has a very like large feel. Like it has like, it's like a, the solo just feels important, right? And it feels important to this period of Rush, and Alex just, he's just wanking out on that solo. So Alex Kelly, we're going to let you go ahead and talk about it.
I know it seems a little weird that we have the same name. It's like, wait, me? Oh,
Yeah.
no,
No, not you.
No, not the famous guy. So throughout the song, he had an arpeggiated line in 6/4, which was essentially part of that 1-4-5, mostly focused around if we transpose it up because he's tuned up a whole step, basically focused around an E power chord. He alters his arpeggios as he moves further into the interlude towards the solo proper. And he does those arpeggios and the power chords in a way where, as I would say, he's kind of obscuring the tonal center, in that there is a tonal center, but is he heading into the key of A? Is he heading into the key of D, which both have neighboring chords? I remember an interview, and I can't remember where I read it. Probably a guitar magazine from the 80s, where he talked about the section that leads into the chorus, where he's basically holding on to the 3rd fret of the thinnest strings on the guitar, much like he did in the riff for Fly By Night, and he's essentially kind of playing his way back through very similar chords. I remember him mentioning that the way they once again layered those tracks, that he had it so that they were just all bleeding over each other to create that big sound that we've been talking about. After that, one of the things that really sells the tuning is that he brings in quite a few harmonics, 12th fret, 7th fret harmonics on the guitar, which at that point, if you're sitting down to figure out the song by ear, that that's not the standard tuning that you can buy in any store. So right away, he's sort of saying, 2/3 of the way through the song, hey, check this out, and the solo itself, there's a sense of melodicism, and I think we said it on one of the Grace Under Pressure solos that there really wasn't a bad Alex Lifeson guitar solo. I mean, nothing made it to tape that was, oh, that solo wasn't really that good. No, they were all good. And one of the things that makes him who he is that ability to move beyond just flailing some licks. And he's got melodicism. It's singable. It's its own little entity within the song itself that contributes to the song. Before taking up too much of everyone's time, at the end of the solo, he moves. That's why we're here, I know. At the end of the solo, he has basically a scale that he walks up that takes us back into that 6/4 meter, beginning on C, ending on C, where you physically play it, or ending on D. Well, I'm already messing myself up with the transposition the way I'm talking, but be that as it may, he walks up a scale, omitting the specific note that would make it either the A major or the D major. Kind of intentional. It's either the root note or it's sort of the Lydian scale, leaving out the Lydian characteristic, which once again, hearkening to Free Will, it begins with the Lydian descent and the major descent. But at that point, instead of going full on guitar geek, I'll conclude my talk about the solo and let other people speak.
I just wanted to add that I love I love when they cut out the other sounds at one point to let him just go. Like it's kind of building, and then right when he goes to soar into the solo, they cut out the other sounds, and it's just basic. It's just bass, drums, guitar, traditional Rush. Like they cut out all the other. There's no other like sounds or anything going on. You just hear
know
the
what
guitar.
solo reminds me of?
Are you going to say David Gilmour, Comfortably Numb first?
No,
First solo? Because that's what
Rush,
it reminds
I
me
mean,
of. Oh, yeah,
After
go ahead.
Image. After Image.
It reminds me of Limelight. How it builds
Yes.
and then it's like, yeah, it reminds me so much of that. Perhaps it was intentional. I don't know, but that's an iconic solo, and I think this is kind of like I said, an underrated. Well, not underrated for this album, but underrated in terms of all of his work. Definitely, it's kind of forgotten about. It's not often mentioned as one of his best, right?
Can we talk about Neil's drumming during that solo though?
Do it.
How he absolutely goes bananas during at least the first part of Alex's solo. I mean, he's just doing all sorts of things where he's just going from the left side to the right side and back, and there's just not a moment spared, and there's just not a breath. Where if you just listen to him without, if you actually take a second and just listen to what Neil's doing, and just for a second not listen to Alex, you'll be blown away, because he's just doing his own thing, and he's just taking it to a whole different level. So shout out to our boy for just killing it in the percussion angle there during that solo.
Yeah.
I hate to
Good
admit,
stuff.
I've had the album since Christmas of 1985, and I've never not listened to Lifeson during that solo.
Yeah, same.
I'm going to have to re-listen. Exactly.
Try it.
Well,
Yeah.
this is one of the albums too, where in studio you can really hear everything pop out too. That's another great thing about the quality of this album is you can hear that drumming a lot clearer than when, like I mentioned the Presto album earlier, where there's there's parts where he's really killing on drums, but there's just not a lot of.
I think that's what Alex means by 3D, right? It's a three-dimensional album.
Exactly.
It's like,
three-dimensional.
As Alex also stated, I guess you described it as like the partial scale that Alex ends the solo with. The choruses then are the kind of chorus that we're calling it, is repeated here. It's a power and the glory. It's a war in paradise. Cinderella story on tumble of the dice. But then, the last verse here is big money goes around the world. Big money give and take. Big money done a power of good. Big money make mistakes. Big money got a heavy hand. Big money take control. Big money got a mean streak. Big money got no soul. And then the outro, right? So, I mean, what are our thoughts on this last verse in the outro here? Anyone? Open panel.
This had to be improvised. Like the way they did it. I don't know. It seems like they stopped the song and for a second they turned around and say, "Hey Alex, start a riff." And it seems like
that's
they
a good
ended
point.
stuff like that. I was like, yeah, okay,
Sure.
that's unique.
I would not be surprised at all if that whole ending, much like, and we'll get that in another episode, the end of Grand Designs. I would not
I was
surprise me
just
at
thinking
all
that.
if that whole section was completely improvised.
Yeah, or perhaps there was a planned fade out maybe, and instead they were like, yeah, no fade out here, right? And let's yeah, it almost sounds like they go into a little mini jam session at the end too. So
Yeah,
for sure. Anyone else got anything they want to add?
And I think the last section, it almost, just gives you a little warning. Yes, you can have a lot of money and it can do a lot of good, but be careful for what you wish for, because you just might get it. And what's the term? Absolute power corrupts absolute power. Absolutely.
Absolute power, yeah, corrupts absolutely.
So once you get that and it goes back to Limelight you were saying, but from a different perspective. Like once you get that shield of big money and the power, it almost becomes a aphrodisiac to itself, and you just crave more and more of it. And once you have that, you'll do anything to keep it. To me, that's the big money got a mean streak, big money got no soul, because all you care about is keeping your big money and keeping that power.
Absolutely. Alex, you
I
can add
know.
something?
Well, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, no one's talked about Geddy's wicked bass riffs on this song.
I was just about to say, yeah.
Like, right from the get-go, he's just going right at it on that bass. It's crazy. And to Nick's point, you can hear it. It's clear. The recording quality on Power Windows are amongst the best of their catalog. It's just, I was listening to it today, and it is such a nice recording.
I think that's one of my favorite albums, just because it sounds good.
Yeah, and those wall basses really do cut through. I mean, I love a Fender Jazz, and everyone loves the Rickenbacker, but those walls definitely have a very distinctive characteristic. One thing I was going to mention, not to take from Geddy, but I wind up doing a kind of peripheral research for some of these just because it's my want, and I wound up putting together a list of a lot of other aspects of pop culture in the mid 80s, a lot of movies, TV shows that when you looked at a lot of the TV then, before 1985 and after, and certainly, as I say, a lot of the movies too, there really was a strong focus on just basically affluent families, whether you had the Keatons from Family Ties, obviously the house in which the Seavers lived, the Cosby Show, and then you look at movies, certainly anything from The Toy from 1982, 9 to 5 in 1980, but then you get into the mid 80s, you started seeing more of these movies that speak to some of Neil's discussion of the negativity of it, where Secrets of My Success, Less Than Zero, some of these films that really show, here's this family, this person, whatever, look how great. Oh, it got bad. It got real bad because there was a lot of money. So there's a real heavy hand, pun intended, because of the lyrics, that really kind of really pushed that person down. Bright Lights, Big City. I'm mentioning a lot of Michael J. Fox movies. Then again, he was big in the 80s.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the soap operas, Dynasty, Dallas, and then 2 years after this album came out was Wall Street. Great movie.
Yeah,
but I mean, like, greed is good. Like, the most famous line of that movie. Like, yeah, you're 100% right on that.
Or all the John Hughes movies. Weird Science. They basically live in a mansion. Just a couple of kids who are hanging out. Oh, we can't get a girlfriend. You guys live in a mansion. Or the friend did. Breakfast Club, 2 out of 5 of them clearly were meant to come from affluent families. There was a little bit of that divide in Pretty in Pink, with Molly Ringwald being kind of a working girl, class girl.
But they're trying to get with the people with money.
Trying to get with the famous people, right? Like Andrew McCarthy's character had a little money. Yeah, that was such a focus, right, in the 80s that, how could they not discuss it? How could they not bring it in as the opener?
But it's such a contrast to the big boom of 80s like arena metal, glam metal, like bands like Motley Crue and Def Leppard and like the Warrant and like the stuff they were singing about and all how many of those bands went broke once that kind of era ended,
Well, Steven Tyler said that he made millions, but it all went up his nose. And I mean,
well, I was just gonna say, fortunately for us, Rush wasn't like that. You know?
Well, I thought it was interesting with Neil writing about that, because to my knowledge, I think from maybe other interviews I saw, some bands were paid in cash in the 70s and 80s. You had photos of Def Leppard holding stacks of cash. So, I mean, they're literally getting big money, but once again, who are they with the money and how are they treating it? So
that's true. Yeah. Any closing thoughts on this song by anyone before we wrap?
We're not going to talk about the music video.
I mean, well, what we should do. Yeah, I
I
mean,
was just saying, like,
we could. It's very 80s, very 3D, very very new technology. I think we should all go through and share our favorite live version of this song, because this song does have quite a few live versions. So, I mean, I guess I'll go first.
I think it's one of their, biggest moments from the 80s.
Yeah, sure.
Again, it's one of Getty's favorite albums. I think they played it for many, many tours.
What the fuck is this?
All right, so my internet crapped out, so here we are. We're all going to give you our favorite live versions of The Big Money. So, Alex, go ahead. You're first.
I have to default to the Show of Hands album at this point. It's the song in its natural habitat.
For me, I mean, Rio's good, and I was able to see the one live on Clockwork Angels myself. That was fantastic, but I definitely agree with Alex. I default to a Show of Hands. I think I'm a sucker for good Alex solos, and it sounds phenomenal live, and that, like, top notch. So a Show of Hands for me. Pat?
Well, I would say Rush in Rio probably for me, because it was the very first show I had, and but I have to say though that the version of a Show of Hands was my first visual live show of the band. So it's like my second ever Rush song was The Big Money that I discovered. So that moment right there was like a pinnacle to see them live. For some reason, I remember it was on the Chronicles VHS. Is that correct? Somebody remembers that? Like the version of Show of Hands, maybe on the VHS of Chronicles. I don't know. My friend put that in his reader, and I was like, I had that vision. Like, I remember I was 6 years old, so Down My Meat was 25 years ago. So I was just make sure that. But that version was cool too. It's like a tie. Sorry, it's like a tie between I would say Rush in Rio and a Show of Hands. Yeah.
Okay, Paul?
I never had the opportunity to see it live, but I'm gonna have to agree with everybody. A Show of Hands, they're at their prime. It's fresh material for them, and they're playing it like perfect. So,
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, to me, Show of Hands is I think by default, where you go to hear it at its peak. I mean, obviously, as Getty's voice is lowered, and I think every version is a good version. I don't think, excuse me, I don't think they've ever, done a bad version. But to me, if you want to hear it the way it should, I think you definitely go back to a Show of Hands.
And Nick?
Yeah, so I'd say Show of Hands is my favorite to watch. I do really enjoy watching it. But when it comes to listening, I can't beat Rio. The crowd, I mean, every song on that album, the crowd, to me, that's a live album. It's how I want to be at a rock show, the rowdiness that they had. And I love how Alex's guitar sounds on that whole album. I know there's people who disagree, but I think his guitar, it's got that raw texture to it that I like when I hear a live guitar. And that's not my favorite. Neither are my favorite. My favorite version is the one I saw on Clockwork Angels tour, because I actually got to see it live. And when it came on, I was like, oh crap, they're playing this song. I didn't think they'd play this. It was awesome. And to be honest, just to wrap this up, I think that with them playing all the 80s stuff on the Clockwork Angels tour, had they not written Power Windows in 1985, I believe that Power Windows could have come out after the Clockwork Angels tour, after all that 80s stuff, just like how they kind of went back with feedback to get them to Snakes and Arrows. I think revisiting a lot of that 80s stuff could have got them to Power Windows, and that could have been the album that came after Clockwork Angels. So I think it sounds good, and also because the sound quality is so good.
Sure. All right, cool. Well, thanks everyone for watching this episode of Rush Roundtable. Apologies, viewers, and of course to the five of you. Thanks for your patience with my crappy internet. You can complain to Spectrum. Yeah, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next week with Grand Designs. Take care, everyone.